Good afternoon. Yes, please. Anton Vernitsky, Channel 1. Mr. President, could you sum up what happened today, what happened behind the closed doors, especially during the restricted attendance meeting with your counterparts from the Eurasian Economic Union? What kind of bilateral meetings you held? Maybe we don't know something. And we heard sanctions, the word sanctions, many times during speeches. How do they impact the activities of the Eurasian Economic Union, these sanctions? As for the bilateral meetings, I have just finished my meeting. It was held without the media. It was a working meeting with the president of Uzbekistan. We spoke about our current agenda, about the prospects for the near future. We have compared notes on possible large-scale joint investment projects. And in my view, and President Mirziyoyev believes so as well, it's possible to implement projects in energy, in nuclear power, in infrastructure, in metallurgy. So there are a lot of serious things that our governments have been discussing for some time now, and gradually we approach its implementation. Then we also met Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates. We also discussed our bilateral relations, and we look forward to seeing the President of the United Arab Emirates coming on a state visit to Russia. In both cases, we also spoke about the situation in and around Ukraine, and we discussed the situation in the Middle East. As for the outcomes of today's meeting, of today's part of the Eurasian Economic Union Summit, we are satisfied with its outcome. We have summed up certain things, as President of Belarus mentioned. We are currently completing the development strategy that is going to end this year. Now we are thinking about how can we develop our joint effort in the future, but overall, we are satisfied, we are happy with the results of our efforts. Why? Because the main integral indicator of the efficiency of our economies is the rate at which economies are growing. And in the Eurasian Economic Union, it's higher than on average across the globe. Across the globe at 3.3%, as is known. And we have more than 4%. And in certain countries, it's even higher than that, 5%. Some countries approaching 6%. And we owe it to our joint effort, because the idea of this joint effort is to leave barriers and obstacles for our prosperity and to enhance the opportunities for the economic growth in our countries. And social indicators of the economic growth is the unemployment rate and real salaries level. And it's the same in the other countries, but I can speak about Russia. We have 2.3% unemployment rate, because it's one of the key indicators for all the economies in the world to showcase what's happening in the economy of the country. The same with the other countries. And the second important indicator is the investment level, which is also growing with us, both in Russia. Despite all the obvious difficulties, this process is ongoing, this effort is ongoing. And of course, we are satisfied with this work. But like always, there are matters that require additional attention. In restricted attendance meeting, we discussed matters related to lifting obstacles in the service domain, and it requires some additional looking into. And then there is some things related to digital signature. These are important things. These are not just some formal things, because if we introduce something like that across our association, it will create good conditions to expand our cooperation. So there are some matters that we discussed in general, and also we discuss how it is going to be regulated and how sanctions are going to look like when there are some violations, and so on and so forth, so that all the actors, all the stakeholders of our economies did not switch their gears when they move from one country to another to make it as smooth as possible. So there are no political difficulties. We all believe that's the path we should adhere to, but there are some technical matters that we need to fine-tune, to iron out at the level of our governments, and we agreed to do exactly that in the near months. And the next meeting, that is going to be informal, usually it is, but still we discuss business there, and as per tradition before the new year, we are going to hold this meeting in St. Petersburg. Well, sanctions, well, yes. Honestly, we are just mentioning that, but we do not go too deep into discussing these matters. RIA Novosti, if I may, I've got another question, which is also very important. You've already mentioned that during the bilateral context, you mentioned Ukrainian situation around Ukraine. So how the things are going with the Ukrainian settlement, in particular when the third round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine is going to take place. And we also know that the countries exchanged their draft memoranda on the settlement of the conflict. So what do you think about the Ukrainian draft? What is your assessment of this draft? And did you receive any reaction from Kiev regarding the Russian memorandum draft? As for memorandum, as is expected, so nothing is unexpected. We anticipated this, and I'm not going to tell you anything unexpected. These are two opposite memoranda, I have to say, and that's why we hold negotiations to try to bring our positions closer. And the fact that they are polar opposites, I don't think it was a surprise to anyone. I wouldn't want to go into details because I think it would be harmful to speak about that before the negotiations. As for what has been done after the negotiations, I believe you can see that yourself. I think another swap took place yesterday or even today, and it is important. It's a humanitarian component. It plays its part because it establishes necessary conditions for a substantive discussion of the gist of the problem. And the agreement was that we will continue our contacts after all the exchanges, after all the swaps are finished. And we came up with this suggestion to have this, we handed over the bodies of the soldiers who were killed in action. So we have already handed over 6,000 bodies, and we are ready to hand over 3,000 more. And now it's up to the Ukrainian side to receive the bodies of their soldiers. And we agreed in such a way that after this phase is over, we will have the third round of talks, and we are ready for this. We need to agree on a place, on location, and on date. But I believe that President of Turkey, President Erdogan, adheres to his former position to support this process, and we are very grateful to him for this, and we are ready to hold this meeting in Istanbul. And when exactly? It's up to the heads of the negotiations team on both sides, and they maintain constant contact with each other at all times, so they speak via phone, which I believe is a good thing. And now they are discussing when this meeting could take place. And what they discuss there, I believe they need to discuss memoranda from both sides that they provided. Yes, please. Pavel Zarubin, Russian TV channel. You have just completed your Eurasian Economic Union Summit, and our former Western partners held a NATO summit, and they discussed enhancing military spending to 5% from the GDP. And now we hear a lot of voices from the West about militarization, and Europe's stance is so aggressive in modern times. That's something new. So what do you think about what's happening in this regard? Well, first of all, this so-called Western community, so-called collective West, if we can call it that now, but nevertheless. So they are distorting everything because increased military spending and this jingoist fervor that they're following, they base it on one thing only, on the fact that Russia is allegedly plays an aggressive part, which we are not, because they look back at the 2022 when the special military operation started, and that's their basis. But how did we approach that? No one speaking about that, but it all started with the fact that we were lied to, that we were deceived, that we were swindled about the NATO enlargement to the east, because the entire world is aware that Russia received promises that not an inch eastward. NATO is not going to enlarge to the east. Then one wave of enlargement, the second wave of enlargement. And we keep saying that security of one country or of a group of countries cannot be ensured at the expense of any other states. And there are documents signed to this tune. And then they kept expanding, and we were told, well, you should not be concerned, you should not be afraid, it's not a threat to you. And when we said that we do believe it's a threat to us, then they did not say anything in response. They just told us to go far away with our opinions. No one wanted to listen to our opinions, but we know better what is a threat to us. It's our right to define what's a threat to us and how big the threat is from one side or from the other side. But no one was listening to us, and they kept on acting like that. Isn't that an aggressive behavior? Because that's exactly what aggressive behavior means, and the West doesn't want to notice this. And when the collective West supported separatist movement in our country, and they supported such a tool as terrorism in their desire to fight Russia, no one thought about ISIS if it was operating in Russia, and those explosions in Moscow and all kinds of things happening. And it has been happening until recently, and no one wants to notice that. It's all well if it's against Russia. Do you think we did not notice this? They also understand this, but they only speak about our aggression. But they should look at themselves first. We have a good proverb. So sometimes you may notice something small in someone else's actions, but you wouldn't notice huge things when you do that. So this rhetoric about alleged aggression of Russia, so they use this rhetoric and then they speak about increased military spending. Okay, let them do that. Let them arm themselves. But now look at the structure of this military spending. First of all, we believe it holds no water, this reference to us being aggressive. The same was happening in Ukraine. How can you call what's happened after the state coup d'etat that was supported by that was backed by the collective West? First, they came and they signed the guarantees when the then Ukrainian president and the opposition negotiated. Then on the very next day, the state coup d'etat happened, and they supported, they funded it, they acknowledged that, they recognized that, and then they were saying that Russia was being aggressive. What is that? Are they fools, or they believe we are? Then we all know what happened in Donbass. For 8 years it has been happening there. Bloody war against civilians, against peaceful population. And for 8 years we were trying to resolve the issue via peaceful means. We were deceived publicly. They acknowledged that. Former Chancellor of Germany and former French President publicly said that they were not going to implement the Minsk Accords, and they only signed them to flood Ukraine with weapons. And they unleashed this war, undeclared war, for 8 years. And we had to use our armed forces to put an end to this war. We recognize the independence of the both republics under the UN Charter, but they don't want to think about that. They don't want to understand what happened before the special military operation, as if they were newborn babies who know nothing that happened before that. So we are not going to play like that anymore. If they want to increase their military spending, it's up to them. They can do that. But that's a sign of their aggressive behavior. And I will explain why. So yes, we have 6.3% of the GDP as a military spending. I believe it's a lot. And that's one of the problems for the budget. And we need to resolve this issue. And we are trying to. And I don't want to draw any parallels in politics because the causes of the conflicts are different only from the financial point of view. For example, during the Korean War that the United States was involved to, they spent 13% of their budget. And during the Vietnam War, they spent 10% of their GDP. And they tried to resolve those issues by raising taxes for the people with income higher than average. So in the first case, they did not care about macroeconomy of their country, but we are also now trying to improve our macroeconomy.
Now about the expenses themselves, 6.3% of the GDP. Is that a lot to be spent on defense? It's over 13.5 trillion rubles. Now, our entire GDP is 223 trillion rubles. So 13.5 out of 233. Is that a lot? Well, it is considerable. We have paid for it with higher inflation. But now we are combating that inflation. Yes, we are moving consistently towards landing the economy back on its feet. And we treat this very reasonably, in fact. I've already spoken about this before, but the wages are going up across the entire region of the Eurasian Economic Union. Last year it rose by 9.7%. In the first 5 months of this year it grew by 4% in real terms. I'd say this is quite satisfactory. Now look at what's happening in the Western countries. They keep burying Russia, but they're going to die themselves. They keep burying us, not noticing that they're dying out themselves. Look, we have 4.3% GDP growth last year, and the year before that 4.1. This year, to fight inflation, we're going to see a lower GDP, but across the Eurozone it's 0.5% growth. In some of the largest economies in Europe, in Germany, in France, they're basically teetering on the brink of inflation. Or look at the armed forces. They keep telling us, everyone, that we are having some problems, that they need to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. They keep saying that all the time, even today. At the same time, they're saying that that we are somehow going to attack NATO countries. So if our armed forces, according to them, is falling apart, how are we going to attack NATO, according to them? Again, they're talking nonsense. They're trying to persuade their own public, their own people, that we are trying to attack them. They do that because they want more money from their people. So they because they have to pay more and more in the public sphere, in the social sphere, while we use our money, our funds. We use a lot of money, of course, to maintain. What they are doing is we're using our money to defend ourselves, and the European countries are waiting their money, sending it to the United States and supporting the militaries of the United States. Now, what we are planning to do is we're going to decrease our spending on defense in the next 3 years. Well, so far there is no final agreement between our Ministry of Finance and Defense Ministry and the government in general, but we're thinking in that direction, while Europe, meanwhile, is looking into raising its defense spending. So who's preparing for aggression? Is it us or is it them? Yes, we are planning to end this special military operation in an environment that is beneficial to us. And what we plan to do is we plan to decrease our defense spending while they are ramping up their defense spending. So if you look at their defense policies and military policies, it's quite clear. So let them do that. Let them do whatever they want to do. In the security sphere, well, it won't give them any more security. And in terms of social security and economic security, it will damage them. And for the final question, Interfax news agency, Ksenia Chernyeva. Mr. President, just recently, President of France said that there needs to be a new package of sanctions introduced against Russia. And if we judge from the statements by European officials, this could include raising cap on oil prices for Russian oil, secondary sanctions for buyers of this oil. What's your view on these measures? What's your view vis-a-vis President France's rhetoric? Well, I've covered in part the answer to your question. The harsher the sanctions, the worse it is for the ones who are introducing those sanctions. It's true for Germany, for France, etc. If you look at their economy, the amount of gas that they're buying is now larger because they are buying more liquefied natural gas, LNG. Right now, how much is it? 400 euros per 1,000 cubic meters of gas. Right now, it's a little lower, 65 or 76 dollars per barrel. What if something happens in the Middle East? What's going to happen? Are they going to block Russian oil in some way? Well, they won't be successful at that. It's basically impossible right now. And the volumes of oil and oil products that are being consumed across the world is growing. They're growing because economies are growing, and you cannot escape that. That's why the market itself is growing. The volumes are growing. But production can only be increased to an extent that was agreed upon within OPEC plus. And that is being calculated during the summer according to certain parameters. So there's nothing that in these sanctions that could help the European economy. Is it going to harm us in any way? Well, we'll see, depending on the realities on the ground, so to speak. I don't believe that it's going to have any substantial effect on us because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of sanctions imposed on us at this moment. Last year, our economy grew by 4.3% and in the Eurozone it grew by 0.9%. So you can judge for yourself. Good afternoon, Andrei Kolesnikov, Kommersant newspaper. Mr. President, does it not seem to you that it's high time you met Donald Trump in person? Because from the outside, it seems like you're distancing from each other. I know you speak on the telephone, but perhaps it's time you saw each other in person. Well, I deeply respect the current American president. He's traveled a very long and difficult path. There were hardships along the way, on his way to the White House. You know that he survived 2 attempts on his life. He's a very courageous person, that's for sure. As for what he's doing within the country, within the United States, or when it comes to the Middle East and his efforts there to achieve peace, for example, in the Ukraine crisis, we value that a lot. And let me say that publicly again, like I've said before, President Trump, I believe, sincerely wants to achieve peace in Ukraine. Just recently, he said it's more difficult than he had believed before. Well, that's true, and it's to be expected, because it's one thing when you look at something from the outside, and it's something different when you actually deal with it. And the same goes for the Middle Eastern matter. Although over there, I think he had much more experience. He was more involved in the Middle East before. But it's difficult there as well, because real life is always difficult. It's more difficult than what you initially believe. But personally, I'm always open to any contacts, to any meetings. And I know that President Trump has said on multiple occasions that we could meet. But I personally think this is something you need to prepare for. Because as a result of such a meeting, we need to achieve some kind of new level of partnership. But overall, thanks to President Donald Trump, relations between Russia and the United States are starting finally to get better. In some respects, of course, we still have issues diplomatically, but the first steps are there. We're moving forward. We have contacts between our major agencies, between the State Department and our Foreign Ministry, between our special services, which is really important, because it's really critical to be able to fight terrorism, whatever the situation is, whatever the environment is. And in other agencies too, we have very good prospects in terms of economic development, economic partnership. I know that American businesses are really they are sending signals that they would like to go back to our market. And we will welcome that, but that requires dialogue. But overall, like I said, that meeting is quite possible, and we certainly would like to see that. Thank you so much.